ClimateXChange is Scotland's centre of expertise on climate change. We have been in existence since 2011, and we're funded through the Scottish Government and have been since our inception. We have been around for a number of years now in order to commission, manage and deliver research and analysis that supports the Scottish Government as our single client on policy development in the areas of climate adaptation and climate mitigation. So I will focus on that transition to net zero. We are based at the University of Edinburgh, and we're in the ECCI building. If anyone's familiar with that or has been to any of our events previously, that's usually where they take place. We're supported by 4 directors who are actually sitting at 4 different institutions in Scotland. So they're providing the strategic direction for our work and managing our KE and research programmes. And they also QA and ensure effective delivery of project outputs. So if anybody has worked with us previously, they'll know that there's a step where there's a director review, and one of these 4 directors will be the people who have reviewed those project outputs. So we've got Dr. Kate Donovan, who's based at the University of Edinburgh. She's our policy lead and chairs the directorate, and her theme area of focus is on risk and adaptation. We've also got Professor Pete Smith, who's at Aberdeen University, and he is our Director for Science. And if anybody knows Pete, they'll know that his area of expertise is in land use. We've also got Professor Deb Roberts, who's at the GHI, who's our Director, providing a link into the Safari Institutes, and a theme lead for rural policy and economics. And we've also got Professor Stuart Galloway, who's at Strathclyde University. He's our director, providing a link into other higher education institutions, and he's the theme lead for energy projects. So just a little bit about the project managers whose names you will see on our specifications. We have 5 project managers at the minute. So there's Anna Marta Bergseng, who leads on resilience and social change, Emma Dorr on business and industry, myself on energy projects, Sarah on land use, and Lucia on economy. These are our areas of specialism, but really we can pick up projects in other areas, and you'll know whose projects, who's leading on those, because their names are on the specifications as contact details. Those of you who follow us on social media or have been on our website will see that we do have a couple of vacancies at the minute, and that's because Anna Marta is taking on the role of programme manager, coming up from the end of July onwards. So we're currently advertising for a replacement for Anna Marta, and we've also got another vacancy in the team coming up with the economy brief. So if you are interested in working for us rather than working with us, please do keep an eye on our socials or on our website for details for how to apply. And for the deadlines, which will be fast approaching for Anna Marta's position. So when it comes to working for us, we receive research requests from the Scottish Government. As I said, they're our main and real sole focus as a customer. So we work with them to build a research specification, which is what gets advertised. So we co-produce that as ClimateXChange and the Scottish Government to make sure that it meets the research needs and to make sure it's something that feels deliverable. CXC handles all of the procurement side and the contracting side, and if you're working with us, then your contract will be via the University of Edinburgh. And then researchers come in with their bids, and we have to follow procurement rules, as you'll be aware. So we make sure there's a fair comparison of bids, not between each other, but a comparison of bids against that project specification. It's as transparent as we possibly can make that process, and we select researchers to work with on the basis of the scores that are given to the different bids for the 5 different areas that are outlined in the specifications. Then once the project gets underway and contracts are issued, really it's a co-produced piece of work where we try and make sure that the linkages between the researchers and the Scottish Government policy officials are as close as they can be through the duration of that project, with ClimateXChange really providing a key role in helping to arrange those project meetings and arrange discussions and make sure that the decisions that are required are being made at the right time within the project timelines. And this sort of co-production format results in a project output, which is branded up with the CXC branding, but with the researchers' names on it. And it's very much a piece of an output or a piece of knowledge from those researchers, but it's in order to meet that Scottish Government need and answers the policy questions. So at this point, what we thought would be useful to do is to ask our audience a couple of questions. So we're going to do this via the chat function. I think we've done it via Slido and other events, but we thought with the numbers today, actually we might be able to handle this through the chat function. So the first question is, have you worked with us before? And this is just so that I can get a feel for who's in the room today. So if you can say yes, no, or I've tried to, that would be useful to know if you have put in any bids for our work, or if I'm speaking to people who've never worked with us before, that's helpful just to know what sort of emphasis to put on the presentation in a second when we go through the sections. What makes a good project spec for you? What are you looking for to help you to answer the questions? And what do you find difficult in responding to invitations to quote? I'm just going to have a look at the chat function and just see. So no, no, no. Okay. A few yeses. Thank you. Thank you for participating, first of all. Submitted, tried to, okay. That's helpful. So what about the second question? What would help you? Is there anything that's unclear? Anything you've struggled with that you thought you don't understand, or is it all clear what we're doing? Clear scope. Very good point. Sometimes the clients don't really know what they want. We very much do our best to try and help clarify that side of things. Collaboration. Interested to pick up Tina's point there on collaboration between academics is not always possible. One be useful to find out if that is that time scales. Eligibility. I've seen that twice now. What might be on PCS? Red is good. Hopefully everyone else can see the chat as well. I think you can because I saw a thumbs up. Remit and format text. Expectations feels like an area here. Budget, yeah, absolutely. Page limit, yeah, I was waiting for that to come out. I'll just mention just now that most of our specifications do have a page limit of 6 pages that's set out. Very occasionally, yeah, it is tight, yeah. Very occasionally we allow slightly more, but I understand the frustrations there when you're trying to fit in enough to be a good proposal, and you might be frustrated at times that you would prefer a little bit more space. A little bit of background to that, I suppose, is that at times we can have up to sort of 10 proposals sent that we have to turn around quite quickly. I think the record was 16 once, so that was quite an undertaking. Thankfully, not me that time, but 16 was a lot to go through. Which is why we limit to 6 pages to try and get something that's succinct and sort of answering the questions as best as possible, understand when people want to put in more detail, but it's trying to be as focused as you can on what will actually score points. So I will sort of review these, and I do have my comms colleague who will have a wee look through and see if there's anything that I'm missing that we can go through, but anything that I'm not picking up just now, we can definitely revisit. Oh, somebody's happy with Pagelet. Thank you, Matthew. It's nice if we can keep it short, I guess, is my main point. And we know that some people have reduced down font size to try and squeeze as much in, which actually can be a bit counterproductive because it makes it more difficult to read. It becomes less accessible for the panel to actually be able to read it. And if you've got screeds and screeds of information, sometimes the message can get lost in a lot of text. So thank you so much for everybody who's shared feedback. We absolutely do try to do that for all of our unsuccessful bidders. It never feels good to say no to somebody who's definitely put time and effort into producing bids, and we're want to be really respectful of the fact that people have done that. So we do try to provide back information on why. So that will be usually in the form of how did your score perform against the winning bidder on those 5 areas and on cost, so that you can see where points were lost. It won't be a comparison against the winning bidder, but it will be a comparison back to the specification, because as a assessment panel, what we do is we look at the bids against the specification and say what the score should be. Should there be any points taken off? That's the approach that our procurement colleagues have told us to work with, where we can justify removing points. So we don't give any bonus points for anything that we've not asked for, but we absolutely must give you reasons why we've subtracted points as we go through. And that's agreed as a panel. It's not just CXC who are doing that. We assess bids with our Scottish government colleagues, and we come to a consensus on what the score for the individual areas are. Yeah, John, I see your point. Yeah, okay, so you trim back down on a section, and feedback suggested more detail required. We try as much as possible not to just say more detail required, but to be specific to what that detail should be. I understand the frustrations though in that. Thank you so much, everybody. We will come back to this if we need to in the Q&A section, but I'm just keen to sort of move on with the presentation for now. So I'm going to shut this down, or else I'll keep looking. I'll keep looking at the chat as we go. So to go through the different sections of the specification, one by one, the first area is understanding the research specification and the policy environment. So in this section, what we're looking for is to add to and develop what's in the specification in your own words. We don't like to just see the information we've put into our spec repeated back to us. So it's really about demonstrating that you understand what this project is for, and explaining how your work is going to address that. Including the relevant policy context is important to demonstrate that you have that sound understanding of what's going on within the policy sphere. So whether that's consultations that have been out, or whether that's for example, the different I can't think of the word at the moment. If we can think of different policies that are coming out from the Scottish Government in that specific area. So it just really demonstrates that you have an understanding of the wider context of what's going on in the world around this area. One area we often see missing from bids is the information on the cross-sectoral nature of the project. So how does this project fit in, and how is there read across into other areas? Can be helpful to have different headings just to really make it clear that what you're saying is responding to the specific questions that are outlined. So these are bullet points that will be in the project specification and the criteria. So it can be useful to use headings just to be super clear to say it makes that point that you're responding to that question rather than, again, a reviewer who's maybe going through 10 of these, searching for that information, just to make it really, really clear that you're responding to that question about demonstrating an understanding of the cross-sectoral nature. I think that can generally help just to be super clear on what you're responding to. Just moving on to the research methodology, this is the area that's usually scored the highest, so potentially up to 30% of the mark that you get will be on your research methodology. It really depends on the project and how set in the specification the methodology is and how well outlined it is, but so we might reduce it slightly and redistribute that percentage points, but it can be sort of 25 to 30% of the marks go on research methodology. So we're really expecting the bulk of your response to be in this area, really outlining a robust methodology, being clear, using plain English where possible and avoiding acronyms, but setting out what you're going to be doing and what the outputs are, why that stage is necessary, what you're going to get from that stage of the methodology. Describe the steps, whether it's data collection, analysis, how are you going to select different pieces of evidence and evaluate them, where are you going to be looking, what search terms are you going to be using, for example, really just to give a bit of a flavour as to what initially you're thinking fits within this piece of work. Be honest about the suitability, robustness, and limitations of an approach. We do appreciate that we are usually setting a budget, which is never enough. We know that. The budget, it also links into the amount of time that you will have available. And yes, if we had a year to do this, we would have a much wider net cast on the evidence, etc. But most of our pieces of work are time bound because of the policy needs. So if it's a rapid evidence review, then we understand that there can maybe limitations to what you'll be able to do in the time frame available to do that desk study. But if you just set out what those are, being honest, it doesn't need to be a critique of the fact that there's only so much time and money available to do this, but just this section where it comes to the suitability, robustness and limitations is often lacking or not clear. So again, using headings to say, this is where I'm going to address the suitability of the approach. This is what the limitations will be. That helps us to be able to understand what might be lacking or what might not be possible to do, or where the give might need to be. We understand that we're not giving you a year to do it, but what can you do in the time that's available? If you are using references, tell us why they're relevant. This goes back to what I was saying about not giving extra points for anything. If you're putting something in here, it really should be addressing the bullet points in the specification. If that reference is relevant to this specification and your knowledge and understanding, or the fact that you've used this before, then fine. But I think in general, just telling us that work's been published in this area doesn't really it doesn't really add anything to that methodology. So just make sure everything is really necessary for demonstrating what you're going to be doing, why you're doing it, and how it's going to lead to the output that we've asked you for. I will just say some of our specifications are, as I mentioned, are more clear on the steps, and they might set out this is what we expect you to do. There is usually a bit of give in that. So if you think that doing this in a different way, for example, if you're aware that there isn't a lot of published data, published evidence, but you think that a stakeholder engagement approach might be more applicable, then set that out and your reasons why, in order for us to understand, and it demonstrates that you've got a good knowledge and understanding of this research area and that you've given some thought to it. If you know that you're going to do a research review and not come back with a lot of information, then that feels again that should be set out as a limitation, and demonstrate that you've thought about other ways that could be used to sort of generate that information that are maybe not set out in the specification. As much as possible, we try to allow that flexibility in approach to make sure that you're able to offer your suggestions for how we might be able to arrive at an answer based on a different methodology. I'm just going to move on to the next area, which is around project management and staff resource. This is about the team who are doing this work. CVs are not counted within the 6-page limit, so you can append those to the bid, and we won't count those into the 6-page limit. Tell us about who is doing the work and how their expertise meets the project requirements. If there's anything specific, we will set it out in this area if we're expecting you to have specific expertise. But otherwise, tell us about how the people that are going to be doing this work are the people that should be doing this work because of their expertise. Tell us how much time those individuals have to different tasks and analytical steps. One point that gets missed quite often is this commitment to the availability of named team members. So we do want to know that the people whose names are going down on this bid do have availability to do the project in the time frame that we're looking for. We absolutely understand that things do change after contracts are awarded, for example, but as far as possible, we want to know that we're assessing bids based on the people who will actually be doing the work. So if you can put in a sentence to commit that, to demonstrate that you've checked calendars, for example, to check that people are around for the time when their expertise will be required, then that helps to give us a bit of faith that the people who are set out there are doing the work. Name the main contact person, so the project manager. Who is that person and how will they be involved throughout the project? What is their role? Are they actually doing any of the work? Are they convening meetings regularly? What is it they're doing in order to manage this project? We also ask for reference to compliance issues such as GDPR. If you're thinking that isn't relevant, then just say we've considered GDPR for this project and we don't think it's relevant because leaving it out makes us wonder if you've thought about it. So as far as possible, if there's a bullet point within that specification, say something to that bullet point, and it helps us to acknowledge the fact that you've thought about that and we know that it's not just been overlooked. Communication report writing is another area where we don't want to have what we put in the specification repeated back to us. We want you to show that you've got an understanding of the audience needs here. So the audience being the policy audience within the Scottish Government. So we want you to demonstrate that you know what sort of reports CXC publishes. Have a look on our website in order to get a flavour for what they look like. There's a sort of, we try to have a standard approach to these things with a short executive summary. We don't use jargon as far as possible. We try to have outputs in plain English, and importantly, we try to make sure that our outputs meet government accessibility standards. So if you're not familiar with any of that, I think that's an area to sort of get familiar with as far as possible, because these are published for the Scottish Government, and the Scottish Government's outputs need to meet accessibility standards. That's really important that CXC outputs do the same. We can help with that when it comes to publication, but we like our contractors to demonstrate an understanding of the requirements in that area, and really just setting out not just the fact that you will meet them, but how will you meet them. Explain the process for delivering these outputs, including the QA process. So we don't want a single person doing all of the writing and checking. Who's involved in checking the outputs and making sure there's one consistent voice for the report, for example, who's reading through all these sections. We asked for previous work. We want links to outputs and publications, but we also want to know what your role or what your team's role was in delivering that previous work. Tell us what the relevance is in that previous work. So if you were writing for a policy audience, or you were, you produced something that did meet government accessibility, then explain why you're giving us that link to previous work to demonstrate how you can do this sort of report writing. Tell us about any added value visualizations and presentations that you're planning. So that often gets missed off. Sometimes it's just about telling us that you'll use charts or tabulated information. It doesn't need to be a great big standalone infographic we're looking for here, but it's about, can you explain how this information can be conveyed in a different way? And we do ask if there's any data management tasks. Again, sometimes this gets missed off. We just want to know if you need to pay for data, that those data costs are included within your bid, that it's not an extra cost that you're expecting someone else to pay for. If there aren't any data management tasks and costs, then just say there are no specific data management tasks and costs. Again, that's a bullet point that is in our specification. We just want to see that you've given it some consideration. And the final area is on quality assurance and risk mitigation. We want to know about quality assurance within the project team. Where are the checks and balances happening? How are issues being addressed? It's QA throughout the whole project we're looking for here. It's in the calculations, it's in the assessment of the different evidence that you're gathering. It's not just about telling us that your organisation meets ISO standards. It's about what you're doing on this project. Going back to the writing the report side of things, quality assurance can't just be one person. If there is a project director who's reviewing things, then great. But we just want to know when they're involved. Are they checking everything before it gets issued, for example? Who is it that has that responsibility? So this section is also divided. So it's quality assurance on one hand, but it's also risk mitigation. What are the risks specific to this project? So we all know that things can go wrong, people can leave, people can get sick, data can be a problem to access. We want to know that you've thought about these things, you've thought about the likelihood that they'll happen and what the impact on the project could be. There's a little example of the sort of thing that we're looking for when it comes to a risk mitigation table. What is it that you're proposing that you would do in the circumstance that that happens. I think I've seen it before that sometimes the mitigation is we will tell ClimateXChange this thing has happened. That's really not what we're looking for in this case. Of course, we expect you to communicate if something has happened and it's going to have an impact on the project, but we want to know that there are steps that could be put in place in order to deal with that risk that when it's occurred. And just passing it on to CXC and the Scottish Government isn't really going to be enough for us at that point. What are you going to do? Do you have other staff members available who could provide a sort of second line if somebody does go off ill? Do you have other experts who might be available to pick things up? I realise it's a worst case scenario, but we just want to know that there are plans in place for mitigating things should they go wrong. So just make sure that this is tailored to this specific project, tailored to the specific risks that you envisage. It doesn't have to be pages and pages, but we do expect to see a few project-related risks and how you're going to manage them.